It has been said that you can't appreciate where you are going if you don't acknowledge where you've been. Today we pause to reflect on the passion, dedication, and hard work that have shaped the past of Faith Assembly of God, and those who have laid the groundwork that lead us to the church we are today. In July 1966, in the Pittsburgh, Kentucky community, a group of prayer warriors had a vision. The group included Jeff and Stella Reed, Virgil and Zella Whitson, Francis Powell, and Minnie Reed, and all desired to see a mighty move of the Holy Spirit fall among them. Under the leadership of Reverend Ed and Mae Jones, this small group of people began meeting in the basement of Jack and Minnie Reed's home. Just a few months later, in October of 1966, this congregation became affiliated with the Kentucky District of the Assemblies of God.
We had a piano, and Wanda Faye played, but she could only play 3 different songs, so we'd sing those 3 songs all the time. Papa Reed fixed a Sunday school room for the kids because he thought it was so important. And it was just, we had service. We had, it was just complete. Preaching, singing, taking up the offering.
Let me say this about having church in your basement. You were saying, you talk about fire conviction, brother. I'd just leave and go somewhere. I couldn't stay home.
But Papa and Granny and Francis and Virgil and Zella were really the beginning. I was there, but I was along for the ride. I had 2 little kids, and I've seen them work, and they carried concrete in buckets and poured it in that old floor in the basement.
This group began to witness to those around them and very soon outgrew that home basement. They congregated and set up a makeshift church on one side of the building that was otherwise used as Reed's Garage.
I remember when we was working in the garage, getting it ready, and Francis Powell was like a slave driver. And Glenn and I had 2 kids, but I still didn't act very old. And we were painting one day, and he's on one side of the door and I was on the other one. So he says something to me, and I look across like that, and right up my face he went, well, we just thought that was the funniest thing, and did Francis ever let us have it? You would have thought we was in the army and we had just been busted. We always had fun. We had our Christmas plays. We'd have to drag out everybody's kids in the family to have them, and Easter egg hunts. We never thought small, even when we were. We didn't just, go and say, well, there's just 8 or 10 of us here, let's go home. We had church.
My first experience of Faith Assembly was whenever Mike and I were dating, and I had gone to the garage when they had the church in the back of his dad's garage. And that was my first visitation at Faith Assembly.
Times were not easy, but the group held together and had a greater vision. In February of 1967, Jerry and Sue Rogers became pastors until July, when Reverend John Yoder and his wife Emma succeeded. It was during these early years that a decision was made to purchase a piece of property on North Highway 25 in Pittsburgh. Brother and Sister Yoder remained until July of 1969, and before long a small block building with a dirt floor basement became home to Faith Assembly of God. In October of 1969, the first service was held at the new location, and in January of 1970, with a total membership consisting of 9 people, Brother Boggs was elected pastor.
We started attending in the fall of 1969, and they were down at Pittsburgh in the old original, not the original, but their new building they built in Pittsburgh. It was a block building with a dirt floor and an old coal furnace.
In the basement.
Dirt floor in the basement with an old coal furnace that smoked so bad that every time we'd come to church, just about in the wintertime, you'd have to open the doors and windows, let air out before you could come in.
But we were 2 wounded souls when we started down there, and they just took us in and kind of mothered us, and so we've been there ever since.
They had, I don't remember what they had, but Francis Powell was the Christmas children's leader, and she asked Dwight to be in that.
Yeah. Well, they had already given out parts, you know, it's like late in October, I think, and so they came up with a part for Dwight so he could be in it as well.
It was during the next few years that Faith Assembly began to blossom. The congregation that consisted of an average of 26 attendees in 1969 expanded to an average of 275 people in 1982. Growth was happening at an extremely rapid rate. The church began to take their message of Jesus cares, we care to the community around them.
This one lady prophesied, and she said that there would be people come from the east and the west and the north and the south, that there would be many souls saved. And here we was, such a few of us, and it was hard to imagine. But then when it began to happen, that was probably the most exciting time, when people started coming in.
I started coming here in 1973. We were in the building down in Pittsburgh, the one we used before we moved up here. And the biggest reason I started coming, well, my brother-in-law was the pastor, and they had a nursery, and I had 2 children under 3 years old. So that was real big for me, was having a place for the kids to go, because I was coming by myself with the kids.
About 6 months later, I came along, got saved, and she happened to be in the nursery at the time. And Stella Reed came and told her, you've got to get out there. Your husband's up the altar. So that's the way that went down.
Theresa and I started coming by ourselves in 1974, and we started coming, and then it was years before Oscar came with us.
Basically, Troy was the pastor, and he was an excellent speaker, and he brought out the word and that kind of thing, and it was just amazing to see all the people that came, you know, from all different walks of life.
We were really close. Everybody, all the people that went to church up there was close. You know, we loved each other and loved people. We would work one night a week, go out and visit one night a week, work another night a week. Everybody had, like I done six or seven things, and we went from 50 or 60 to finally about 300, wasn't it?
For Troy Boggs, he met her on the side of the road, and he said, "I want you to come to church down here at Faith," and I just shunned it off. So we started coming then in 75, I think it was. I'm not real sure on that, but it all goes back to Troy Boggs inviting us, and that's why we're here.
But it was really exciting when all the people began to come in, and when Brother Boggs came, and that's when it really started building. Oh, it was awesome. He loved people. Mm-hmm. He knew how to deal with people, and he would go out of his way. He and Mary Jane both. And
Troy was non-stop. When he got up in the morning, hit the floor, he used to have done something for the church or something for the Lord till he went to bed that night. Every day, 7 days a week. You couldn't stay with him.
There were things going, because Mary Jane had all kinds of things, because they had been in the Assemblies of God Church. So there were activities that they had. They had the youth program going, and they had Sunday school classes and children's program.
The floor for the upstairs was plywood, and the parking lot was deadlift clay. In the rain or whatever in the winter, someone would get stuck constantly. You was all the time pushing one another out of a parking lot.
That was interesting, every service, who was going to have to be pushed out.
And but then I would be trapped in the building, and the floor had to be mopped so much the plywood was coming up. The pews were homemade pews that would, when you'd sit down,
It's a pair of pantyhose every week, new pantyhose.
we used to laugh about it. Somebody may scream, think somebody got in the spirit, but just somebody getting pinched.
And I served on the board after I was in my lapse time or waiting time they had. I don't remember back then what it was, but he always had something for you to do or getting ready to do something.
We used to have little campfire picnics at the house down in Arthur Ridge. And one Pacific time we had a hayride. And I had Roberta and Ray Vandeventer and their family, Bob Jones, and just, there's probably 25 or 30 families there. And I took them on a hayride, and I went over this big hill on the tractor. Of course, they didn't know it, but I was already out of control. I had too much weight for what tractor I had, so I just, they thought I was just really going fast to scare them, but it was out of control. And I was glad to get to the bottom and us all still be on the trailer, I tell you.
One thing that I'd like to say about that old church down there, of course, Troy was pastor then, and he was constantly building. Well, the building ended up along for the auditorium and a piece that went across the back like a T. We were laying tile upstairs one night, and we hadn't paid anything attention to it, and so somebody came in and said, "Hey," said, "you guys been outside lately?" And we said, "No." It's been about 2 hours. Said, "Well, you better go." Well, we didn't know. We didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But we went outside, and we all was just like we was drunk. We'd been in there smelling that glue for 2 hours. Now that's something other that I remember.
My dad was probably in his 50s, wasn't he, before he got saved. But he made up for it, you know, when he was able.
It was just a little tiny, looked like a little schoolroom, and it began to grow, and it was like a loaf of bread. It got longer and longer and longer. But
And we did most of it ourselves. I mean, every night sometimes.
He was solid. He was a solid pastor, and he was a good pastor, not just because he was my brother-in-law, but he believed in activities that were going on, supported everything that we did, like the missionettes and rangers and children's church, and he was my pastor.
When we first came, we started bringing kids in our car. We had a 9-passenger station wagon. We'd pick up kids.
In fact, matter your mommy was one of them.
I never will forget, you know, picking up your mama and Sharon and Bobby. And
Yeah.
I remember when the first time Mary let Danny come, your mother had a death grip on his hand as he got on the bus.
In 1976, Happy Times Daycare was opened and licensed to care for 40 children. The daycare, under the leadership of Mary Jane Boggs, maintained a maximum capacity and was very prosperous and well respected in the community. Soon the vision grew and a Christian school started in 1979. As the church attendees continued to multiply, the facility was bursting at the seams. The building was expanded over and over. Under the leadership of Brother Boggs, the congregation purchased 8 acres of property from Clyde and Francis Powell at the corner of I-75 and Highway 80. Groundbreaking service for the gymnasium and a 2-story educational wing was held on Easter Sunday. This facility housed both the daycare and Christian school for several years.
Francis, you might say, donated it. They sold it to the church. I think my memory's correct on this, for $8,000 an acre, and we bought 8 acres. The church in the beginning was to be at the bottom of the hill down there, roughly where Cheddar's or somewhere is at now, along in there. Not Cheddar's, but on the other side of the street, where the Chevron's at or something. They started deadlifting the coal. As they would progress up the hill, we would move the church further up the hill. And as it kept on moving, and we wound up here.
On July 1st, 1984, the Reverend Don Cherry and his wife Pat were elected pastors by a 100% vote. The congregation disposed of the old church property, on U.S. Highway 25 and made a march to the new facility on Sunday morning. It was an exciting time for the congregation. The gymnasium was divided into two parts, and a sanctuary was set up on one side. While he remained as pastor, plans were made and put into operation to construct a new sanctuary on the grounds. Brother Cherry resigned in 1988 before the new sanctuary was completed.
We loved Brother Cherry. He was a precious man of God. He loved the people. That was one of the things, he just really loved the people. He was a teacher, a real teacher.
Kind of soft-spoken guy, and he done a lot of preaching by examples, you know, and it was a good time. He was in the transition when he came, and he held the church together until the next pastor come to.
Well, Brother Cherry was a very, very soothing person as a pastor and a person for us to have at that time.
The Reverend John H. Leland became pastor on March 13, 1988. It was during his administration that the congregation built the sanctuary between the gymnasium and the educational wing. The sanctuary was completed in 1989, and Brother Leland remained pastor until September of 1990.
And then whenever we did get Brother Leland, then, you know, we were in the gym, and it seemed difficult, it seemed almost impossible to do, but he was bent on getting us into the sanctuary, and it did happen, and we loved Brother Leland.
He was a fireball preacher. Yeah, he was screaming, hollering, jumping up and down.
In December of 1990, Reverend Benny Jackson and his wife Betty accepted the call and became full-time pastors of Faith Assembly of God. At this time, Sunday morning worship attendance was averaging just under 100. The church was struggling financially and needed a miracle. Very soon the decision was made by Brother Jackson and the board to close the daycare and the school. Brother Jackson was a wise man, very business-minded. He put in place a program called the GOOD Program, which stood for Get Out of Debt. He worked with the University of Kentucky and was granted a 5-year lease of the educational wing for Somerset Community College starting in 1992. During the next several years, the congregation experienced a steady growth in attendance.
Jackson came in, and we had the school at that time, and we were actually in financial scrape. We was, and he closed the school down, and he's very good on finances. So he got us on the right track, and he's a very fine man.
We have not always been in the shape we're in now. We've been at the point, and I don't know if you ever heard this said or not, but and I've served a lot of years on the board, we would put a hat in the middle of the table and put the bills in it now. If Bill Smith's talked to you any about it, he's probably already told you that. But a lot of times, you know, we had to do that, but we always survived. There's a group of people here at this church. It's just unbelievable how loyal they are to the church, and with bringing in their tithes and, you know, supporting the church. Great group of people.
Yes.
The state, whoever was in there at that time, knew about him and knew his abilities with finance, and he called and asked him if he would come and take this church because of the problems that we were having, and he was such a blessing. I mean, we couldn't have made it if he hadn't got us straightened out.
He became real good friends with Oscar. We would go to their house and visit, and they would come to ours. And then he started coming every once in a while when Brother Jackson was here. And they had the Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames drama while Brother Jackson was here. And I got Oscar to come to church that Sunday night, and he held up his hand for prayer, and then he came up front. He came all the way up to the front and got saved that night.
In mid-1995, God began stirring the hearts of the people, and there was a great desire for a deeper walk with Him. Prayer meetings were held, and very soon, God birthed a new plan for Faith Assembly of God.
We started a prayer meeting in our basement towards the end of his time here, and Brother Jackson started coming, and it was just phenomenal, the things that occurred out of that prayer meeting. And so then whenever Brother Hager, when they did call him to come to the church, Brother Jackson passed the mantle to Brother Hager.
In August of 1995, Reverend Ronald Hager and his wife Jane accepted the pastorate of Faith Assembly of God. Along with being a wonderful musician, Brother Hager pushed the congregation to get back to its roots. The group began to desire a revival. The church flourished under the ministry of Pastor Hager for the next 3 years and 10 months.
Well, he was a fireball type preacher, and he done a great job. He was a magnificent piano player.
David Elliott was our youth pastor and music director also. And all these young people, they would be slain in the spirit out there on the steps, and they would have to be carried to the car to go home.
He could play the piano. He was a wonderful preacher, and she was a wonderful pastor's wife. But, oh, we just, we loved it when he would sit down and start playing the piano.
In March of 2000, Joe Willoughby and his lovely wife Tammy were elected as pastors of Faith Assembly of God. Pastor Willoughby was a gifted orator, and many of the members grew in their personal walk with the Lord under his leadership.
Joe was a good, I think, a good pastor and a good preacher.
I loved Joe Willoughby then. I love Joe Willoughby today. And he probably caused in me to be birthed the hunger to read God's Word and to study and holding me accountable for that. And I learned through that a hard lesson about submissiveness.
Reverend Greg Abels and his wife Tina accepted the role of pastors in May of 2003. Abels quickly became vested in the community here in London, and the church grew numerically under his leadership. At this time, missions giving reached an all-time high under the leadership of Lucille Robinson. Additionally, it was under Abel's leadership that the church was able to completely pay off the mortgage on the facility. Just a few short months later, the congregation decided to give the existing structure a facelift, and the sanctuary was renovated in 2005.
He loved people. He loved the first responders. He got involved in the community.
I just like, they came over at the house about every night because they lived next door and just wanted to talk.
Well, the church prospered under Abels.
Brian and Belinda Seidel were elected to the pastorate in December of 2006. Having a military background, Seidel's strengths were certainly organizational. The church held regular leadership meetings. His family, including his 4 children, became integrated with the community, playing high school and middle school sports. He remained the senior pastor until February of 2012.
Well, all the pastors that have been here have been in season for when we needed them and up till right now. So we love him and still today, if he'll call me and talk to me or call me and ask me for something or something, but then Rachel, his daughter, she's like a daughter to us. So she comes and spends some time with us along. And everything, it's, the whole process, everything has some good points. Then there's some humps, but we've overcome those, and we're looking to move on up.
In June of 2012, the church found itself in need of healing and unity. God provided Reverend Lynn and Vicki Terry, who quickly grew to love the congregation. Brother Terry possessed a tender heart and brought compassion and church-wide harmony to the wounded body. The church remained steady and became an even stronger family unit during this time.
Well, I really loved him and her. I just thought him and Vicki was just great.
He taught the church to love after the church had really been wounded. I loved Lynn Terry then, and I still love Lynn Terry. I just think he really taught the church how to love.
Recently, in April of 2016, Pastors Dan and Sherry Collard were elected to the leadership of Faith Assembly with a 100% confirmation vote. There is an excitement brewing among our membership. The church is already experiencing growth, both numerically and spiritually. And the people believe that great things are in the near future.
It's going to explode, I think. I really do.
I think that you'll see a great movement of God, because I believe Brother Dan is the one that will listen to the Lord.
I think the church will grow, but I think they'll grow in the Lord. They will grow to the point where they're coming to church because they want to worship God and be a part of what we got already going on. That's what I look forward to. I think it'll happen.
I think this pastor is what's good for us. I really do.
To me, I feel like the church is going back to its roots. When it started, it was all about prayer. It was all about the community, just loving on people, just involving everyone. He wants to see the baptism of the Holy Spirit ignited in this place, and wants to see prayer, which is what the whole church was about from when it began.
We, as a church, have no big eyes and little U's. And although we've been here for the whole show, particularly, I'm no better than Blow Joe that walked in off the street. And God can do as much for anybody as He can do for me.
I think our people are just so special, and and I hope my great-grandchildren will grow up and love the church as much as we do.